This article is written by Aloy A.G. Mako, and it talked about Igbo land, not landlocked. Igbos are undoubtedly an indigenous people presently lying within Nigeria. So international law will surely come into play if conflict arises out of Nigeria persistent institutional resistance to granting a seaport to Igbo land. It is often said that a lie told so many times, if unchallenged, may, in course of time, begin to pass for the truth. Simply put, if you keep repeating your lies, people might begin to think that is the truth. One of such is the terrible lie institutionally pervaded since the end of the Civil War, to the effect that Igbo land is landlocked, or that it has no access to the sea. The purpose of this article, therefore, is to debunk that lie with some simple historical and topographical evidence that are even in plain view, in plain sight. If you care to dig or do some physical exploration of your own, you might see much more of this. Now, suffice it to say that it is a profound tragedy that an entire generation or generations of the immediate post-war Igbos never bothered to check, but simply accepted this brazen institutionalized or institutional falsehood, largely intended to taunt the Igbos and put them down. A few that knew it to be false just didn't care anymore. That history was banned since the end of the Civil War made it worse. Plus, the fact that most people do not take physical geography that serious anymore. Otherwise, they would have known that Abia, Imo, and Anambra states are varying short distance paths to the Atlantic Ocean through Imo, Azumiri, and Niger rivers. It is not really rocket science, as you can easily confirm this if you know how to read Google Earth or conquer your fear of swamp snakes and walk through these areas on foot. There are also many other hardly explored waterways and slithering tributaries, including the remote reaches of Oguta Lake and Oseaoka River in Ihiala, Imo State, and that meandered through Igbo Delta wetlands to the southeastern ends of the Atlantic waterfront. These rivers have varying lengths of short navigational paths to the Atlantic Ocean, and in some cases are far shorter nautically and even on footpath than the Port Harcourt, Calabar, and Ibaka seaports are to their side of the Atlantic. Now, when you are crossing the bridge that gets you to the east of Nigeria, what do you see? You see water. It can be even docked deeper if they need to have bigger ships in that region. So there is no excuse for this. Many of these pathways, including particularly the ones from the outer reaches of Imo and Azumiri rivers, terminate at the Atlantic Ocean at no more than 15 to 30 nautical miles to the beach head. To put it in layman's language, 1 nautical mile equals 1.8 kilometers. Thus, the contiguity of the south is not even the greater Igbo land to the Atlantic is less nautical miles than the Atlantic is to the seaports in Calabar, One, Ibaka, Lagos, and Port Harcourt. If you discount the territories excised from Igbo land during state creations and the damnable boundary adjustments, it will be far less. To be sure, Ikwere land or Igwe, which bears the greater portions of the Port Harcourt seaport, were dredged up to 50 miles to the Atlantic front through the Bonny River. On a seaport was dredged up to 60 miles to the Atlantic, and Calabar seaport was dredged 45 nautical miles to the Atlantic. Ibaka seaport is about 30 nautical miles to the Atlantic, and the Lagos seaport dredged up to about 50 nautical miles to the Atlantic. So if they could have dredged this, why can't they dredge these other rivers. They can also be dredged to allow, a much more wider aspect. Compare all of this to Obuaku in Abia State, which is only 25 nautical miles to the Atlantic from the confluence of Imo, Azumiri River, which itself separately lies not more than 30 nautical miles to the Atlantic beachfront. The less obvious one is the little known Osea Oka River in Ihala, Imo State, which is mere 18 nautical to the Atlantic, all with its 65 feet of natural depth, unarguably comparable to no other river in Nigeria. Additionally, what is geopolitically known as Igbo land today is far smaller than what it was allegedly supposed to be. As far back as 1856, Baiki, one of the earliest and credible geographers of ancient Nigeria, had this to say: Igbo homeland, extend east and west from the old Calabar River to the banks of the Kwara Niger River, and possesses also some territories at Abo and Igbo clan to the westward of the later stream. On the north, it borders on Igala, and Akpoto, and it is separated from the sea only by petty tribes, all of which trace their origins to this great race. Baiki William Balfour published with a sanction of Her Majesty government in 1856. But with that infamous post-war abandoned property policy and the egregious institutional injustice in boundary adjustment and the widespread anti-Igbo gerrymandering, Igbos physically and psychologically lost their vested ancestral lands, all to the point of not caring anymore about their historical contiguity to the Atlantic, which their ancestors beheld and called the Great Sea. The psychological beat down got so bad that some of the descendants of these Igbo ancestors nearest to the Atlantic and not lying outside Southeast are no longer sure whether they are Igbos or not. The worst injustice was in 1976 when the Justice Nassar Boundary Adjustment Commission made a serious and a targeted agenda of carving out core Igbo land territories into some neighboring states of the South-South. But they did not quite make an absolute success of it. They missed the southernmost Southeast land that possesses rivers that meander through slices of Igbo-friendly South-South territories and ended up at the Atlantic, thus unwittingly placing Igbo land and its right of access to the sea under the canons of customary international law. As it stands, international law of the sea guarantees Igbo land, whether it remains Nigerian territory or not, unhindered access to the nearest sea. In this case, the Atlantic, peacefully by the many short distance rivers, waterways, and tributaries that originated from the Igbo land, but ultimately washed into the Atlantic through contiguous South-South territories. For avoidance of doubt, there is particularly the Obuaku confluence in Ukwa West, Abia State, that flows through Ikota Basin in Akwa Ibom State before expanding out and washing into the near reaches of the Atlantic, and the river Niger, which ultimately joined the Atlantic through a vast network of hardly explored creeks and mangrove swamps that abound the Bight of Bonny in the South-South. Nigeria is subject to the international law of the sea and is therefore bound to abide by its provisions should the need arise in a scenario of persistent sovereign oppression of an identifiable indigenous group. The others are the United Nations Treaty of the Sea and the African Union treaties and conventions on the sea, including particularly the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which Nigeria ratified and domesticated in 1983. The pertinent provisions are mostly embedded in the copious provisions relating to the collective economic and commercial rights of indigenous people lying within the treaty nations. Indeed, those are undoubtedly an indigenous people presently lying within Nigeria. So international law will surely come into play if a conflict arises out of Nigeria's persistent institutional resistance to granting a seaport in Igbo land. At this point, I think it's so clear that It is supposed to be provided. There should be seaports, at least where you have rivers. They should be able to dredge. They should be able to make space for this so business can thrive. Just imagine how much good the sea, access to the sea, would do for the southeast of Nigeria. It would do a whole lot of good. But I don't know why they've kept this the way it is. Now, they talked about the north being landlocked, and they try to say that the Igbo land is also landlocked. But from this explanation and from geography, simple geography, and what you can see here and there, you can actually see that it is not landlocked, and moreover, they can dredge. Like I say, you can expand and give more room to the sea as much as it is safe, and you allow business to thrive in those regions. Igbo land landlocked. Some say no argument. The entire Igbo land is not up to the old Oyo state, Oyo and Oshu landmass, and that's why Igbos are scattered elsewhere. Now, I don't know what you think about this. Let us know in the comment section below. Is the Igbo land landlocked, and that is why they are scattered all over, because there's no even space enough for them in their own place?